When I was in college, I had a professor who told me that he had a near-death experience and that he told me, I know God is real. And he told me
Wow.
how he came out, he was in the hospital, came out of his body, and he said he visited his wife and his kids. And he said that, when he came back to, he confirmed with his wife and his kids, I can't remember all the details now, what they were doing, where they were.
So he didn't see them in the afterlife. He saw them from the afterlife doing things on earth.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome to the Revel Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reason with faith. And they confirmed it. And he told me that experience changed his life. And one of the things that he said was he felt incredible love. He just felt incredible love and incredible peace. He said, and I knew that I felt home. I felt like I'm home, but I needed to come back. God wanted me back. And do you find, and before that, he was an atheist. He was a skeptic.
Wow.
And so after that, he believed in God. So do you find that, as you were saying, do atheists who have these NDEs tend to convert to Christianity or at least believing in God?
I'd say typically they convert immediately. Well, you have to think it through. I think a normal, rational person is going to say, okay, was that real? And they're going to think it through. They're going to say, well, it sure seemed real. And then they start saying, oh, well, I saw things that happen on earth that I shouldn't have been able to know. And so they may take a little time to process this. But typically, I'd say they become theists. It's not just that they believe that there's a God, but they see this being of light that knows them intimately, that seems to know everything, that is personal. It's not just some going into a nirvana state like you think about in Eastern religions where your self disappears in this universal mind. No, this is a personal being that has a personality, that loves you intimately, that knows all about you. And so very typically, an atheist will come back and say, okay, there's a God. Now, what about Christianity? Well, some experiences talk about Jesus, just like just like Saul's experience on the Damascus Road. He was out killing Christians. He was not a great guy. And yet he had a vision of Jesus. But he didn't get the whole gospel in that vision. He had to go on and talk to Ananias, talk to others about it. I think that if you look in the Bible, if you believe in the biblical revelation, seeking is a very important thing to God. Jesus said, seek and you shall find. And that in the Greek is a present tense. Seek and keep on seeking and you shall find. That's what I had to do. I had to go through an intellectual search to kind of confirm things. In Jeremiah, it says, you'll seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. So it's not just that God's trying to satisfy our curiosity, and it's not that he doesn't want, I don't think, to bypass seeking. So I think a lot of people will come out of a near-death experience and they may interpret it in some weird ways. They may say, oh, everybody goes to heaven after they die, or this confirms this or that, and they'll say and I'll say, okay, well, did you get that from the experience itself, or that's just kind of your conclusion right now in your intellectual and spiritual journey? Mm-hmm. So people, they don't come out with a full theology, but I do believe it causes them to seek. And if they seek, they'll eventually find. And we see Jesus talking to people like this too, very rarely. I mean, with Nicodemus, he gave the thing about how you have to be born again. But other people, he would ask, they would come to him saying, what else do I have to do? And he'd say, oh, go keep the commandments, or quit sinning, go and sin no more. And you're like, wait a minute, why didn't you tell them about how to get saved? Well, I think he wants people to go through that seeking process. He values that. And that's a part of our developing a relationship with him, is that we have to cry out to him to reveal himself and go through our own study and our own thinking ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. Has your theology changed at all in researching these NDEs? Has it shifted in how you view what's really important to God? if that makes sense.
I think I would say that it's underscored and reinforced a lot of my theology. And it's given me a little more depth. I mean, when people that feel totally unworthy, they may have not been seeking God, might have been totally out for self, and they go and see this God that just loves them incredibly. Also, some will say they kind of knew, it just felt like they almost knew everything when they were on the other side. Now, they don't know those things now when they come back. It's like their brain doesn't have that capacity. But they'll say things like, now I understand why I grew up in the family I did, or why I went through the pains or suffering that I went through. When I was on the other side, I understood it all made sense. And then they meet this all-loving God. To me, that really helped me with the problem of evil, because people will say, well, why is there so much suffering in the world if God really loves us? Well, when they go to the other side, it all makes sense. There's some reason for those horrific things to be happening in the world, and God not stopping them all, or God not answering all of our prayers. I think it made me love God more, because I thought, once I go to the other side, these people say things like, I never wanted to leave that being's side ever. He was such a compelling person. He was perfect, and he loved me entirely. It just reinforced to me the love of God. Now, there are other areas where my theology shifted somewhat. I wouldn't say it took a totally different direction, but a lot of my early Christian walk, I was in a Bible church, which tend to be fairly dispensational, and you got the feeling that, some things God did during biblical times that no longer happen now. And I don't know if they necessarily said that, but even in Baptist circles, people just wouldn't, when I went to Baptist churches, people just didn't talk about visions as if they still happen today. I never remember anybody reporting a vision in church. I've been in a lot of churches, and maybe I've just been hanging around the wrong crowd because I'm not Pentecostal or charismatic. I'm sure they probably talk about them more. But what I began to realize when I compared all this to Scripture is I looked through and I said, oh my goodness, visions is just one of the main ways that God worked with people in the Bible. I read through the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, average of 500 verses in each of those books talking about visions. That was incredible. And then you go to the end of the Bible, you go to the end of Acts, the church history. They're having visions, and they're not just visions about telling you more theology. Some people say, oh, well, once we got the Bible, we don't need visions. But these visions were about things like giving Paul direction for his missionary journey. Well, the Bible didn't tell him that distinctly. After the Bible was complete, surely some people still need those things. So it seems to me visions were all through the Bible. On what biblical grounds should we say that they ceased? So what I'm seeing is, now I'm not the type person that's getting their direction in life through visions. I've only had one perhaps visionary experience, which was a negative one. I think it was an attack of the evil one when I was in college. So it's not like an everyday thing. It's not like I should expect, if I really get close to God, this is the general way God's going to direct me. But to say that this maybe once in my life or in the lives of others in my life, that they may have them, the more I start talking about this, the more people start sharing with me their own visions, which have been very significant to them. And yet they've never even felt like in a church they could talk about it. So that's been a shift on my part. Now I'm really going back to the Bible and saying, oh my goodness, people talk about, well, I saw a deceased relative. And I say, well, that's not biblical. And I say, well, what was the transfiguration of Jesus? Jesus was talking to two long deceased people, Moses and Elijah. That's called an after-death communication, which is very well studied these days. When you look at people that have lost a loved one, a very high percentage of them claim to have heard this person come back and say goodbye to them or had some kind of experience with them. So what biblical grounds do we have to say, oh, that's all of the devil?
Wow.
You know, Stephen had a deathbed experience right before he died as a martyr. How biblically can people say that this just doesn't happen now and it must be of the devil or made up or lies? It just doesn't fit the evidence that we see, either biblically or in these great studies that we see today.